Thank you so much for having me. I want to first extend my most heartfelt gratitude to the Mildred Berryman Institute for LGBTQ Utah History for inviting me to speak at this lecture series. It's such an honor to work with you, and I look forward to all of your future events that you have planned. I then want to thank all of my professors who are here. Your support is invaluable, and I could not have done this research without your due dates keeping me in check. Next, the hugest thank you to everyone in attendance. This is an awesome turnout.
We're just going to move her
Great.
A little closer.
Beautiful.
You're good.
Great. This is an awesome turnout, and I'm overwhelmed by how many people have taken the time to be here in person or on Zoom or are watching this on the future. Thank you. As Megan so kindly introduced me, my name is Sascha Darlington, pronoun she, her, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Utah, getting my master's in American history with a focus on queer and trans theory and HIV/AIDS. I first learned about AIDS while listening to the original Broadway cast recording of Rent on the family computer in the early aughts. I would sing along to Take Me or Leave Me and do the rallying cry in La Vie Boheme and shout, "Actual reality, act up, fight AIDS!" Neither me nor my mom, who purchased the CD, would realize that ACT UP and HIV would shape my entire academic journey. I have spent the last 5 years studying HIV. It's at the center of every paper that I've written, every book that I've read, which is a lot when you're in grad school, and it's even embedded in how I interpret pop culture, from A Picture of Dorian Gray to AMC's Interview with the Vampire and Fall Out Boy's Save Rock and Roll album. At this point, it consumes my thoughts so fully that when burnout and writer's block creep in, I catch myself asking, God, this is annoying. Doesn't everybody know this already? And the truth is that they don't. This is my own niche interest. And I have to remember that most people were not taught this history to begin with. For many of us, school happened during or immediately following the height of the AIDS crisis, when misinformation was everywhere. And with the current administration quietly removing mentions of HIV from official websites, it's more important than ever to talk about HIV, its history, and the activism that fought to keep it visible. So today, I want to take you through a crash course on US HIV history with a focus on activism and its deeply intersectional roots in race, class, gender, disability, and justice. Something is ringing. It's fine. Before we dive in, I want to offer a brief framework for this presentation and a few disclaimers about language. First, history isn't linear, and neither is this presentation. While I've made every effort to ensure clarity, the very nature of queer history resists a straightforward timeline. Activists drew from past movements, civil rights, feminist organizing, Black and Chicana liberation, and disability justice, and reworked those strategies into new urgent contexts. Because of this, I cannot provide an exhaustive overview of every civil rights movement in US history. Instead, I will focus on how HIV activists borrowed, transformed, and mobilized specific tools and ideas. To communicate these connections, I will use a callback of my own, a short on-screen note inspired by MTV and VH1's pop-up video. When I initially pitched this idea to my peers, most of them haven't watched MTV and had no idea what I was talking about, and this aged me. Despite this setback, I'm doing it anyways because it makes sense to me. A note on language, I prioritize the term HIV instead of HIV/AIDS or simply just AIDS. AIDS tends to position the epidemic in the past, whereas HIV remains an ongoing public health crisis, especially in marginalized communities. This linguistic choice is intentional and reflects the continued urgency of this subject. Finally, a content note. This presentation addresses topics including death, sex, drug use, institutional neglect, public protest, and hating the president. It includes terms and language that may be explicit or unsettling to some, but some of which are also reclaimed and politicized by the communities at the center of this history. So with that grounding, let us begin. I want to start by situating us in the gay liberation movement, which began gaining momentum alongside the broader civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, a time when the United States was witnessing a rising socio-political push for equality and justice. In the realm of gay rights, this period is often referred to as the homophile movement, led primarily by groups by the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis. These early activists laid the groundwork for gay visibility, challenged legal discrimination during the Lavender Scare, and fought to remove homosexuality from its classification as a mental illness in the DSM-1 and DSM-2. However, due to their assimilationist approach and unwillingness to push beyond a traditional American lifestyle aligned with the cis-heteronormative patriarchy, the homophile movement is often seen as limited in its effectiveness and declined in influence by the 1970s. The Compton's cafeteria riots, are often overlooked as one of the earliest trans and queer uprisings in US history. It occurred in San Francisco in August 1966, where employees at the cafeteria would routinely call the police on transgender patrons, many of whom were teens or young adults experiencing housing insecurity and engaging in survival sex work. While the exact events leading to the riot remain unclear due to the absence of police reports or news coverage, we don't even have an exact date, just a hot day in August. The sentiment was unmistakable. The transvestites of the Tenderloin district had been harassed, frisked, and brutalized by the police too many times, and they finally fought back. The following day, more transgender people, hustlers, Tenderloin street folks, and other members of the GLBT community returned to protest not only Compton's cafeteria, but ongoing unnecessary police brutality. Surprise audience participation. Where else have we seen protests against police brutality? Okay. Yes. What else? What about next month? Thank you. Stonewall Uprising, which took place between June 27th and July 3rd, 1969. This became a pivotal moment in the gay liberation movement, which I hope we would all recognize with Pride Month coming up. But if you don't know, crowds averaged around 500 people a night, and queers met on Christopher Street just outside of the Stonewall Inn and Bar. There were 6 nights of rioting, glass throwing, brick throwing, fire starting, and taunting the NYPD with chanting, singing, performing kick lines and chorus lines, and engaging in public displays of affection. This ignited a new spirit of defiance and visibility for queer people nationwide. In the years that followed, organizations like the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, the Queens Liberation Front, and the Lavender Menace emerged, alongside 36 chapters of the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activist Alliance across the country. Still, the gay liberation movement continued to marginalize transgender people and people of color in its fight for equality. During the 1970s, gay doctors and allied health professionals began responding to a widespread mistrust of the medical system within the gay community. This mistrust was not unfounded. Queer patients often faced discrimination, the risk of being outed, misdiagnoses rooted in homophobic medical frameworks, or encountered snap moral judgment based on perceived promiscuity. In response, some medical professionals took matters into their own hands by creating low-profile clinics, often located in alleys or tucked away on side streets. These gay health collectives primarily focused on treating sexually transmitted infections and diseases, while also offering care in an environment where gay patients could feel safe, seen, and respected. As the movement for community care gained traction, these clinics evolved throughout the 1980s into a broader, more coordinated network. They laid the foundation for what would become a full infrastructure of LGBTQ-focused community health centers. These networks offered not just STI treatment, but also primary care, mental health services, and support groups tailored to the needs of queer and trans people. Places like St. Mark's Community Clinic in San Francisco and the Gay Men's Health Project in New York became pioneering institutions, offering care without stigma, and often served as an early model for what queer inclusive public health could look like on a national scale. These clinicians took inspiration from the community health centers established by the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords, who created and operated their own clinics in response to racial and ethnic bias in medical care. They adopted a mindset rooted in self-sufficiency, quote, "If the state won't help us, we will help ourselves." Additionally, many of the guiding principles behind these queer-led health efforts, such as patient-centered knowledge, self-determination, bodily autonomy, and compassionate care, these are all terms that were directly influenced by the ethos of the feminist health movement. How do we feel about these pop-ups? Does they make sense? Doesn't matter because I'm keeping them anyways. I want to take us now into what was described as an apocalypse. In the summer of 1981, the Center for Disease Control's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report published in Los Angeles, 5 young and previously healthy gay men had developed PCP pneumonia, a particularly rare lung infection among other opportunistic infections. That same day in New York, similar reports of gay men having a rare and aggressive cancer called Kaposi sarcoma were also reported to the CDC. After these initial reports, rumors began to spread about gay pneumonia and gay cancer infecting the homosexual community, giving this disease its first name, gay-related immune deficiency, or GRID. By the end of that year, there were 131 deaths reported among the 337 cases of severe immune deficiency. By 1989, the cases in the United States had surpassed over 100,000 people. These community clinics quickly became the front lines for HIV care and treatment. As the crisis unfolded, they were often the only places offering consistent, compassionate care. So much so that doctors from major medical institutions began turning to the gay health clinics to learn not only about the disease, but also about institutional homophobia embedded in the healthcare system. I want to emphasize that disability justice activists and Black health advocates were always at the forefront of fighting medical stigma and systematic neglect. This was before the term AIDS existed, before we even had a name for the virus, and before the discovery of HIV. So what did these clinics do with no information? Well, they ramped up treatment to the best of their ability. They provided palliative care, they hosted support groups, they offered therapy, they created educational resources, and even arranged for childcare. They did everything they could to care for their communities in the face of an unknown and terrifying disease. Lesbians in particular stepped up, taking the lead in nursing, blood drives, and palliative care for their gay brothers and trans sisters at a time when hospitals refused to treat patients with GRID, eventually named AIDS, in 1982. Many medical institutions made a cold, calculated cost-risk assessment and decided that gay men simply weren't worth saving. They viewed these patients not as people, but as vectors of disease, as social outcasts whose suffering could be ignored without consequence. Not every doctor and nurse believed that queer lives were expendable. Some upheld their Hippocratic oath and provided care despite severe stigma and fear. But it was queer women who stayed from the beginning and until the end. This is why the L comes first in LGBTQ.
Yes.
Yes.
Early activism also looked like everyday people informing their own communities about what they could do to prevent exposure and mitigate transmission of AIDS. In 1983, we have a manual, How to Have Sex in an Epidemic, written by Michael Callan and Richard Berkowitz, who are recognized as one of the first HIV activists. The manual asks its audience, geared towards gay men but could be used by anyone, to alter their way of thinking about having safe sex. This is a new term coined by this duo. For this reason, How to Have Sex in an Epidemic remains an important document for sexual health education in the 1980s and 90s, and we still use this phrase today when discussing sexual health. I want to draw our attention to the statement in the love chapter. Men loving men was the basis of gay liberation. If you love the person you are fucking, even just for one night, you won't want to make them sick. Maybe affection is our best protection. Fun fact, I was researching this document in early 2020 as an essential worker and was immediately discovered by the IT guy who said, hey, nice Wikipedia article. Don't do that. Sociologist Deborah B. Gold narrates these early responses to HIV among the gay and lesbian community. She maintains that gays and lesbians, friends, lovers of people with AIDS, community activists, and sympathetic medical professionals, and people with AIDS themselves worked together to provide services and care to people who were ill and dying. This homestead form of activism spanned gender and sexuality, even though at the time it was a disease that mostly affected men who have sex with men. HIV was seen as a communal assault on the entire queer community. It's important to note that at this early stage in the epidemic, the public and even scientists did not yet understand the full scope of HIV's impact, particularly its disproportionate toll on Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as people who use IV drugs. Also note, feminists and anti-racist lesbians of color recognized and began flagging that race, class, and sex would play a larger role in the AIDS crisis. But we aren't there yet. First, we have a legal turning point. In 1986, the Supreme Court upheld a 5-4 decision in Bowers v. Hardwick that denied homosexuals the constitutional right to engage in consensual sex in the privacy of their own homes. The case arose after Michael Hardwick was charged with violating the state of Georgia's sodomy law for committing oral sex with another adult male in his bedroom, when a police officer entered unannounced with an invalid warrant and arrested them both. At the Supreme Court, slippery slope fallacy arguments were used to deny homosexuals the right to privacy. Girl? Nope. Give me a second. There we go. Here's the thing. Hardwick came after privacy jurisprudence that had already been established in landmark cases such as Roe v. Wade, Loving v. Virginia, and Griswold v. Connecticut. Who can tell me which of these court cases established? Yes.
Interracial marriage.
Yes.
Birth control.
2, married couples
Yes.
only. Thank you.
Why is it nice and stop be bare?
Hey, I'm doing my best. If the right to privacy wasn't truly guaranteed for everyone, then what other rights were at risk? For many, the Hardwick decision symbolized the government's complicity in the HIV crisis. The shock of state-sponsored and socially sanctioned homophobia had disastrous real-world consequences. It was clear that the Supreme Court's ruling, combined with the ongoing epidemic, created a hostile environment that threatened the lives of gays and lesbians. In response, militant demonstrations erupted worldwide. Over 2,000 people marched in San Francisco, hundreds rallied in Washington, D.C., and Boston, and more than 3,000 gathered in Greenwich Village, New York City. One reporter stated it was enough to awaken the radical in most apolitical queers. Consequently, the nation witnessed queer fury never seen before, including protests, sit-ins, die-ins, demonstrations, disruptions of the 4th of July celebrations, and visiting Supreme Court justices' homes in the thousands. Queers across the country agreed. Anger and militant political activism were needed. Thus, direct action HIV groups began to establish and grow roots. Within just the 7 months following the Hardwick decision, organizations such as the Lavender Hill Mob, the Citizens for Medical Justice in San Francisco, Chicago for AIDS Rights, and the Silence Equals Death Collective had formed, marking a new era of fierce grassroots resistance. This is perhaps the most recognizable image and slogan in HIV activism. The message "silence equals death" was visible from the street, but to read the small text at the bottom, you'd have to get inches away. Why is Reagan silent about AIDS? What is really going on at the Center for Disease Control, Federal Drug Administration, and the Vatican? Gays and lesbians are not expendable. Use your power. Vote. Boycott. Defend yourselves. Turn your anger, fear, and grief into action. Silence Equals Death was a poster created by a group of young gay men in New York City who had stopped keeping track of how many of their friends had died of HIV after the list surpassed 100. Most of them had had professional marketing and graphic design experience, so they felt uniquely qualified to create a poster that could serve a dual purpose about HIV. First, they wished to urge the gay and lesbian communities of New York City into action by encouraging their peers to organize politically and demand that the government do something, or frankly anything, about the growing crisis. Secondly, they also wanted this poster to speak to those outside of their community, suggesting that this community organizing had already taken place. When considering what imagery to use, they drew inspiration from American conservative writer William F. Buckley's latest op-ed piece, wherein he proposed that everyone detected with AIDS should be tattooed on the forearm and on the buttocks. The physical marking and forced tattooing were reminiscent of genocide in the Holocaust, where a pink downward triangle was used to mark sexual deviants, predominantly homosexual men. The connection of HIV deaths being a genocide to the Holocaust felt apt. Still, the group was hesitant and thought of other symbols or imagery they could use that would fully be inclusive of gays and lesbians, but would also mark their contemporary moment. None felt quite as poignant as the triangle, though, so they modernized it into a more vivid hue, turned it upward as an accident, and reclaimed its positioning for the epidemic. The Silence Equals Death tagline felt necessary, as silence on behalf of the gay movement, the government, and the medical system was proving to be lethal. Turn anger, fear, and grief into action fulfilled their first purpose, and posting the poster all over neighborhoods of Manhattan served the second. A new militant direct action group, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP, adopted the poster in their marketing, and the tagline was perfect, as the various silences were being addressed. The silence of the gay community as they re-entered the closet amid rumors of AIDS being a gay cancer, the very nature of political silencing of news and research programs, and the communal silence as complicity in the ongoing epidemic. ACT UP catapulted Silence Equals Death and the pink triangle into the mainstream, forcing citizens to address the epidemic they had been ignoring for so long. Although ACT UP wasn't the first HIV activist group when it emerged in 1987, it was undoubtedly the loudest. And despite AIDS being in the name, AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, the group's focus extended far beyond the virus itself, ACT UP and the broader HIV activist movement were about reclaiming power amid overlapping crises of health, poverty, and political neglect. The collective camaraderie of ACT UP members reinforced a desire to live and to fight. It created relationships that likely would have not existed had they not met on the streets in a protest or in a life support group. In the years before ACT UP's founding, some people developed fears around socializing, partying, and having sex, fully isolating themselves off from the world. Others felt it necessary to really live it up before they died and dove headlong into these social activities. ACT UP was a movement where people could put their whole energy into it. Many activists recall these times as a religious experience, a revolutionary joy, a place where you could thrive and exist in solidarity for the same fight. One member describes it as follows: "I think that was one of the amazing things about ACT UP. We could have big parties at big venues and people would come and dance their heads off, and then the next day go out and get arrested. This combination is what you need in order to continue. You need some life." ACT UP leaders took a strategic approach to activism, training members in nonviolent civil disobedience and preparing them for arrest. They emphasized the importance of working with marshals, who were designated ACT UP members who would handle interactions with law enforcement and ensure that individuals arrested would receive their necessary medications because they had HIV. Members were also coached on how to be effective spokespeople, giving both compelling sound bites and personal HIV stories to reach out to others who were still afraid or closeted. This is what makes HIV activism so distinct, in that people told their own stories, and more than that, people listened. The sharing of personal stories to empower others to take action is a page taken out of the feminist conscious raising collectives. Going back for a minute, the early narrative of AIDS being a gay disease not only stigmatized gay men, but also solidified a framework that excluded other marginalized groups who were frequently misdiagnosed or excluded from critical research, leaving them in the shadow of the epidemic. It wasn't until 1986 that researchers began identifying that Black and Latino communities were disproportionately affected by HIV. And it wasn't until more than a decade after its initial discovery in 1993 that the CDC revised its definition of AIDS to include women as an at-risk group. The number of transgender people infected with HIV and dying of AIDS is entirely unknown, as transgender women were classified as gay men. These delays in medical discoveries and classification only further contribute to the misdiagnoses and overlooked deaths of thousands of individuals. HIV was not a singular issue affecting only the gay community. It was a public health crisis that intersected with and deeply impacted individuals across all genders, sexualities, races, and classes. Queer theorists and early HIV activists understood that the scale and urgency of the epidemic demanded a return to coalitional politics, where solidarity across diverse groups was not just necessary, but imperative. This is why the community-building efforts of ACT UP was defined as the social movement of the decade. ACT UP worked to build a militant, broad-based coalition, recognizing the need for diverse voices and skills that were necessary to tackle the multifaceted challenges faced by people living with HIV. ACT UP's very first demonstration, just 2 weeks after its founding, took aim at the pharmaceutical giant Burroughs Wellcome, which had slapped a $10,000 annual price tag on AZT, the first promising antiretroviral treatment for HIV, and the first drug ever fast-tracked by the FDA for approval, making it one of the most expensive prescription drugs in the nation's history. The protest demanded the swift, affordable release of life-saving drugs and a comprehensive national AIDS policy. ACT UP would continue to protest Wellcome, and their tactics escalated until 1989, when 7 members infiltrated the New York Stock Exchange, interrupting the opening bell with foghorns, dropping fake $100 bills onto the trading floor, and unfurling a giant banner reading "Sell Wellcome." ACT UP targeted not only pharmaceutical companies, but also the government institutions failing to act. They staged major protests at the FDA headquarters, calling out its sluggish drug approval processes. They occupied the NIH to demand increased funding, transparency, and inclusion of people with AIDS in their clinical trial design. And the Catholic Church was also highly protested for its opposition to condom use and comprehensive safe-sex education. One of ACT UP's most infamous demonstrations took place inside of St. Patrick's Cathedral in 1989, where activists interrupted Mass to denounce the church's deadly policies. Their activism reached past institutions to target the very people they deemed culpable for inaction. Senator Jesse Helms, Dr. Anthony Fauci, New York City mayors Ed Koch and Rudy Giuliani, real estate mogul Donald Trump, President Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, President George H.W. Bush, President Bill Clinton, and VP Al Gore, just to name a few. ACT UP met each person with high visibility outrage, organizing a 3,000-person march on Ed Koch's New York City Hall, staging a 1,500-person die-in outside of Bush's seaside vacation home, holding public funerals outside the White House, and even unfurling a giant condom on the home of Senator Jesse Helms.
Yes.
A vivid warning that deadly policies and prejudice were the true contagion, not the virus. They flooded congressional corridors, locked down federal buildings, interrupted State of the Union addresses, and plastered cities with bloody painted handprints. Kathy Cohen, a Black feminist and academic, narrates the shift away from assimilation to a militant form of liberational activism, stating, "In each project, individuals from numerous identities, heterosexual, gay, poor, wealthy, white, Black, Latino, they came together to challenge the dominant constructions of who should be allowed to and who received care. No particular identity exclusively determined the shared political commitments of these activists. Instead, their similar positions as marginalized subjects relative to the state, made clear through the government's lack of response to AIDS, formed the basis of this political unity." I changed my slides this morning. I wanted to show the full scope of ACT UP as it grew and established new roots. The following list are the states that had at least one autonomous chapter within ACT UP: Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, the District of Columbia, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Illinois, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Texas, Washington, Wisconsin, and Puerto Rico, as well as international chapters in Australia, Belgium, Canada, England, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, South Africa, and the USSR.
You didn't list Utah. There was one here. Well,
We'll get
I
it.
begged. I
We'll get it.
dove so deep. I'm trying to go next. I got it. That's good. As ACT UP grew in numbers and established new chapters, new committees were formed to ensure its activism remained intersectional, addressing the needs of marginalized communities. Colloquially known as the Social Justice Squad, these groups included the Majority Action Committee, the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus. I don't think I'm on the right slide. Give me a second. Aha, we are not. Okay. There we go. The Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, the Women's Caucus, the Housing Committee, and the Prisons Action Committee. They operated within ACT UP's existing committees to challenge the dominant perception of ACT UP as a movement primarily composed of young, cisgender, white, middle-class gay men. The Majority Action Committee, which focused on advocating for Black, Indigenous, Latino people of color, the majority of people affected with HIV, tailored their approaches to inform communities of color, appropriately code-switching their language to educate neighborhoods about HIV infection and safe sex. The Housing Committee became a crucial part of ACT UP's efforts, specifically focusing on addressing housing instability and homelessness within HIV-positive communities. Many individuals had become homeless due to discrimination in housing and employment based only on suspected HIV status, which was legally permissible until the passing of the Americans with Disability Act in 1990. The Women's Caucus is rooted in the praxis of the feminist health movement of the 60s and 70s, where organizers carried forward efforts for reproductive freedom and birth control access and challenging medical gender bias. The ACT UP Women's Caucus built upon these ideas, not only advocating for women's health and HIV diagnosis, but also continuing to emphasize issues of congenital health of mothers living with HIV. Again, building from the Women's Caucus, feminist activists recognized the intersection of AIDS and incarceration, leading to the formation of the Prison Action Committee. This group addressed abolitionism, particularly its impact on the mass incarceration of people of color, as well as the heightened criminalization of queer individuals, drug users, and sex workers, all of which who were disproportionately affected by HIV. Once incarcerated, they often faced inadequate and delayed medical care, underscoring the broader issue of poverty. Here we go. Taking us back again into 1986, 5 years into the epidemic, with over 20,000 Americans dead, it became increasingly clear that HIV had the potential to become an epidemiological disaster. Still, the state and federal governments were failing to publicly address the epidemic at all, one scholar stating that political inaction reflects a political denial, an unwillingness to engage in sensitive issues, such as those inextricably linked to HIV transmission. Public leaders committed to HIV prevention would have to go against the slight majority of Americans' perception of AIDS. At the time, 51% of the population believed that it was a person's own fault if they got HIV, and up to 44% believed that AIDS was a punishment from God on immoral behavior. This punishment actually gave AIDS its first nickname, Wrath of God, or WOG. President Ronald Reagan's prolonged silence was also beholden to the alignment of the new right, as acknowledging AIDS would have meant confronting issues his administration was determined to ignore. In fact, it wasn't until September of 1985 when President Reagan acknowledged AIDS during a press conference, and it wasn't included in a major public speech until May of 1987, 5 years and 11 months after the CDC published its initial reports on the disease. To put this into context, today we are 5 years and 4 months since the initial reports of COVID-19. It wasn't until May of 1987 that the Presidential AIDS Commission was finally approved, a significant step in addressing the crisis. However, the Commission's final report exposed the failures of conservative policies, concluding that the spread of HIV was largely a result of systemic poverty, not the assumed moral failure of homosexuals and welfare queens. HIV/AIDS remains an issue of class-based structural violence due to no implementation of universal health care, limited access to comprehensive safe sex education, and impacts on a person's ability to work and employment following diagnosis of a chronic disease. It is essential to recognize that HIV is not just an individual health issue, but a direct consequence of larger social and economic conditions. Poverty, as the Presidential AIDS Commission uncovered, is inextricably linked to HIV transmission and its outcomes. Those living in poverty often face barriers such as inadequate housing, poor nutrition and food insecurity, limited access to resources for education, and restricted or limited access to medical care, all of which contribute to a higher vulnerability to HIV. Moreover, these same factors limit the capacity for activism. Activism requires resources, time, education, and a sense of security, which individuals facing economic hardship are less likely to have. In this way, poverty not only makes people more susceptible to HIV, but also prevents them from being able to mobilize, advocate, or participate in efforts that could help address the various overlapping epidemics they are facing. This is why intersectionality is so important. Coalition is a powerful tool for collective liberation. You can't fight one system of oppression without addressing them all. To quote Martin Luther King Jr., "Freedom is indivisible. We have it all, or we are not free." The HIV epidemic and the activism that emerged from it reveals how marginalized communities were forced to fight not only for treatment, but for recognition, dignity. Recognition, dignity, and justice. The HIV crisis is far from over, and the inequalities that shaped its early years still define health outcomes today. We see it in the racialized impacts of COVID-19, the criminalization of drug use rather than the expansion of harm reduction, and the rollback of reproductive rights, and the ongoing attacks on transgender existence. Like the early years of HIV, public health decisions today are shaped more by moral panic and political expediency than by science or equity. The refusal to provide universal health care, the defunding of social services, and the increasing surveillance and policing of marginalized bodies all reinforce cycles of vulnerability and exclusion. Today, we are re-entering a period of silencing, one marked not only by neglect, but by active erasure. Government agencies are stripping mentions of HIV and transgender existence from public websites, and they are being reshaped to exclude the very communities it was meant to serve. This isn't just bureaucratic oversight. This is a calculated effort to make certain lives and their deaths silenced once again. In this context, ACT UP's legacy is not just historical, but urgent. The insistence that silence is not passive, but enforced, and that the resistance must be loud, embodied, and relentless reminds us what is at stake when words, identities, and lives are politically disappeared. Studying ACT UP means understanding a moment in the past and reckoning with how we carry their resistance forward. I'd like to close with this final quote. "During the darkest days of the AIDS crisis, we buried our friends in the morning. We protested in the afternoon, and we danced all night. The dance kept us in the fight because it was the dance we were fighting for. It didn't look like we were going to win, and then we did. It doesn't feel like we're going to win now, but we could. Keep fighting, keep dancing." Thank you. I'll take questions, I guess. Yes.
Sascha, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
I have two questions for you, a serious one and a silly one.
Okay, great.
So the silly question is, I was also a rent girly growing up. That's also how I learned about AIDS. I would love to hear how your interpretation or opinion about rent has changed now that you are an AIDS scholar. And I would also love to hear more about what it's like to teach high schoolers about this moment in time and kind of what that experience has been like for you as a teacher, but also for youth who were not alive for this moment.
Absolutely. I love Rent through and through.
Me too.
I think that it was so instrumental in making it into the mainstream for specifically ACT UP. And I think that a lot of people in this room, maybe it's just me and you, I don't care, really kind of got down to the roots of what these lives looked like, especially within Alphabet City and Greenwich Village. And so I feel like this is, from a personal perspective, I love it. From a historical perspective, it's a great like little mini archive that's fun, and I love the creation of it. And then teaching this in high school, I taught them mostly about Stonewall, which was a more integrated class period. But when speaking about AIDS, I felt very limited in what I could say because we can't exactly talk about sex and having safe sex. And the lesson that I had was on a day without art, so I wanted to just get to teaching about Keith Haring and other things. But this is the reason why I want to get a PhD, because I want to be able to teach this and speak my mind. And I can't do that within the Utah educational system. So here's where I'm at. Of course. Yes. Of course.
Do you mind speaking a little bit more about other organizations that popped up? I assume ACT UP wasn't the only anti-AIDS queer organization here.
Yes, of course. There were a lot of minor coalitions that arose alongside. They're just based on big city organizations. So there's a lot within, especially like Philadelphia, Atlanta, populations with a majority Black population. But there are countless organizations across the globe, nationally. There were even multiple here in Utah that kind of like coalesced and then broke apart and then brought back together. So we see this movement kind of popping up everywhere. But not.
I swear it was
I tried so hard. I was digging my nails into my table trying to find it.
Devil Hansen was his boyfriend, who I can't remember.
I tried so hard, Connell. I searched for you. I
I
tried.
I might have.
If you can find it, if you can, I would love to see it.
I was like, I was shocked. Like, what?
I know.
Have I totally misremembered?
I don't think so.
Right, yeah.
I don't know. I tried.
I
tried.
I've been to like a protest and I'm fired. I was not on drugs at that time. Okay.
Stockton?
Yeah, this is a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
This is a question about how we know what's effective. So one of the things that I'm haunted by is how do we know what is the efficacy of this type of activism? It feels intuitive that it's right to be done. At the very least, this would be our form of dancing as well.
Right.
In the streets would be actually parallel to dancing in terms of what we feel. But
Oh, Lord.
Life is intense. Have you read these studies, or are there good studies saying what was sort of turning the tide? Because many different things were happening at this time. And I'm just thinking about right now about climate change activism, right?
Right.
And just thinking about what is being said about that, which is that providing people with more information has not made people more on side of fighting climate change. Sort of person-to-person interactions with trusted people So what's your take on this? Where do you go to find,
Mhm.
evidence for this type of activism as being a major thing,
Mhm.
turning the tide? Again, feels right to me. I want this to be the answer.
Of course.
I'm looking for you to tell me it's the answer, but I'm wondering what is the evidence? Strange for me to ask about evidence.
No, you're great.
That's what I'm wondering about. Let me just say one thing.
Yes.
Also, AIDS films, right,
Mhm.
which were very prominent and really interesting. So just thinking about different forms of representation along with marchings.
Of course. Thank you for your long form question. I think that I think that at this time it was a throw everything you got and whatever sticks sticks. And so we do have this like militant protest form, but not everyone did that. Most people would do caretaking of individuals, and that's also a form of care and support. We also have doing the research, like actually working for these companies, finding a cure, trying to figure out like the medical side of it, like all of these additional forms. I think that like everyone who got involved with HIV activism took their specialty and did what they could in order to push it forward to the best of their capabilities. And so I don't have any numbers for you, but I would say that it was successful in that it just got people talking about it and got people involved. I hope that answers your question. Yes.
Tell me if I'm wrong here, because this is something that I've always believed to be true, and it was how initially trying to get more people to care about AIDS, they would often highlight people who, I'm saying it this way, it wasn't their fault, right? So Ryan White, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And in order to make the people care, they had to show individuals who, they got it through a blood transfusion or things like that. And I have always thought that Rent was, the first time that there was this big thing where people had AIDS and they caught it from drug use and sex, and you care about them anyway, and you love them completely and absolutely. And there is no stigma or shame surrounding how they got it, because it doesn't matter how they got it. So again, my opinion has always been this is the first, maybe it's just the first one that I saw, but were there other, films or plays or anything like that before that, kind of showed this side?
Yes. Yeah. I'm not 100% on like films and media, but ACT UP had a major movement to state that all people with AIDS are innocent. And so disestablishing that if you got AIDS from a blood transfusion or any unsafe way, or if you're a child born to a mother with HIV, they disestablish that. All people with AIDS are innocent. I know. I'm for the people on Zoom, heavy hand quotes. ACT UP established that all people with AIDS are innocent. And it was in a lot of banners and imagery that they used. They really wanted to convey that this was an issue for everybody and that everybody deserved care. And ACT UP also coined the term like healthcare is a human right. And so they are establishing this in multiple ways to maintain that everyone deserves treatment and medicine and at the very least, like an honorable way to die. But my God, you also have to live. And so that's kind of how they handled it. Beck, you had a question. Yes, you did.
Okay, well, it was just, which was your favorite protest?
My favorite?
That's why. Which was your favorite action?
Senator Jesse Helms' condom house, obviously. I think about that one all the time. I meant to bring condoms today. I'm so sorry.
Like, I know they put the condom on. Do we know how they got it off? Like, could Helms?
Doesn't matter. I'd imagine you'd unroll it from the bottom. I have no idea. No idea.
See, everybody
So it's just a trick of the light. So it's not a full condom over the full house. They just had the corner of it, and then they just draped a giant latex thing over the top. And it read, a condom to stop unsafe politics. Helms is deadlier than a virus. Yes.
From a lot of the activism, and I'm really fascinated by the solidarity intersectionality of it all. I'm curious, I don't want to say we're in the same time, but it's perilous. I'm curious what you're seeing and maybe what you would like to see that could be more effective.
In terms of HIV activism?
Just activism.
Activism in general?
The general bullshit that's happening
right
now.
Of course. So
I guess we've learned a lot from HIV,
of course,
especially in the 2020s. We're taking a lot from.
So I think that we are in a world that is dying in 1,000 different ways, and if you try and fight every single injustice all at once, the system is going to chew you up, and that exhaustion is by design. And so I've put like my life work into HIV education and activism, but earlier, I guess last month, I attended the Joy and Fury event with speaker Shannon Downey, and she advocates for finding the one thing that matters most to you, and you work at that one thing for the rest of your life until you die, and someone else picks it up and carries it forward. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't show up when others make the call, because there are bigger issues that arise and you can step in and fight for those movements. But it just means that you bring the best of yourself to the fight that you know most intimately. And so that's kind of how I view advocating. Thank you. Yeah, I think that like solidarity doesn't have to mean like an omnipresence. It just requires a deep commitment. Yes.
I'm Sascha's grandpa. I've been playing a rock and roll band since I was 15 years old. I'm 73 now. But in the 80s, when Elton John came out, we found out he was gay, and there was a lot of talk about this stuff. My band actually played at the David O. McKay Center down in the Provo area, a big dance. And we were in the middle playing a song, and some guys got out and started dancing together. The guy in charge of the dance literally came down, waved his hands in front of us to stop, and he told them, "You're not allowed to do this." And they said, "Why?" And he says, "Because men don't dance with men. Haven't you seen all the stuff that goes on when that starts off like this?" And I looked over at our guitar player. I said, "This is wrong," and stuff. I said, "I think," and they literally kicked these guys out. There was about a half dozen of them, like 3 couples. But about a half dozen, they kicked them out. But I looked over at our guitar player and says, "We should tell them that we don't want to play." And then the keyboard player looked over and says, "Hey, if we do that, they're going to just have us shut our stuff down. We're not going to get paid and everything." And I am embarrassed to say, especially when I see what a champion for justice and just humanity that my granddaughter is, and all you guys are here for this. I'm thinking, I made the wrong decision. I should have just said, "I'm not doing it. If these guys cannot be welcome out here to dance," and what made it worse is there were some girls that were dancing together, but the mindset back in the day when I was younger like that was girls can dance with girls and it's a non-sexual kind of thing. But if guys dance with guys, you know what they're going to do when they get out of the place and stuff. And it was just such a wrong type of thing. And it's taken years, and little by little, the world is catching up with the common sense that so many people, are understanding now and everything. You love who you love. I mean, the heart wants what the heart wants and stuff. And it just, I've been in bands with guys that get upset when, I had a guitar player in one of my bands, and there was a guy out in the crowd that took a liking to him. He was up smiling at him. At one point, he actually turned around and put his butt out, wheeling around a little bit. The guitar player's going, "Geez, what do I have to do?" And he literally walked to the back of the stage because he didn't want to be up there. And I felt bad for for the guy, but and I also felt bad that my guitar player was this jaded about it and stuff. And I knew how his dad was a real hardcore macho. This, you know, he was one of these guys. Men don't do dishes. That's women's work, that kind of thing. And so that was just kind of along the same kind, showing that not the hatred, but just the, I don't know.
It's deep.
I'm excited about this. I mean, the pride thing went on and stuff. My gosh, there's still obviously a big fight ahead for everybody who wants to get it out and be as common as any other kind of relationship and stuff. And I'm thrilled that my granddaughter is a part of this, and that all you guys are here, and that I found out about this and was able to come, because it makes me, even though I'm an old guy and stuff, it's like the line from the old show where Jack Nicholson says, "You make me want to be a better man. You make me want to be a better man, a better grandpa, a better human being." So proud of them all. So.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I love the presentation. I learned a lot, but I'm wondering too, I know there's still some impact on this or not, but like, do you know what happened here, I guess, or what we did as far as...
Of course. Beth, do you want to tackle this?
Sure.
Please.
Okay. So we did a documentary film called Quiet Heroes, and so you can stream that. And I'm finishing up a book about it. I mean, Utah, the epidemic was a little late, which I think is true of a lot of interiors, right? So it's really bad in New York and San Francisco by 1982. Here it's like 85, 86, 87. It starts to get really bad. The only doctor in the state who would treat people was a woman named Dr. Kristen Reese. And she was an internist and infectious disease specialist who had a practice that went to Holy Cross Hospital. And so as she starts to get more and more clients, and it's funny, she tries to educate medical professionals so that they'll treat people, but then all they did was just refer to her, right? So the education wasn't super helpful. But then the Sisters of the Holy Cross, Holy Cross was still run by the sisters. And so the Sisters of Holy Cross set up an AIDS ward. And the Sisters of Holy Cross believe in the signs of the times and in helping people, right? And that's literally what they think they should be doing. So they don't want to convert people to Catholicism. They want to meet the needs of the times. So they did an AIDS ward. The Utah AIDS Foundation was founded by local activists, first as the PWA Coalition, then, silly, lots of stuff, lots of complicated stuff. But the response here was really good. Care was good. The community really came together. There was a lot, and tried to define itself broadly. The Utah AIDS Foundation provided a lot of services for people. It's been around. I mean, it's now turned itself into Utah Legacy, UAF Legacy Health, but it does still exist as an organization.
Dr. Patty Reagan
founded the education wing, so that would have been the Salt Lake AIDS Foundation.
AIDS Project Utah.
No, AIDS Project Utah was CARE.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Basically, the response was really good, right? But it was terrible from the outside. The state itself was very hostile, and the local. So relations with the two major churches. So the LDS Church is huge. The Catholic Church is a small but very active group. So it's funny because it's like we don't know what it looks like in other conservative spaces. And the fact that people came to Dr. Reese from Idaho and Montana and Wyoming and Nevada says to me that there is not good care and good support in those places. But we really don't know a lot yet. So, I mean, that's what Catherine, what would you, or Kim? Yeah. So anyway, and there's the oral histories are all about that, and some of them are so much fun. Narrators are really interesting.
I think students were very susceptible and open and receptive and wanting to hear about this. You think of how early that was, that to be hearing that about that in college courses and stuff that Rocky was doing.
Yeah.
I mean, it felt like
That's me.
start in college.
Rock is my
Yes.
it's my dead name. No.
Interesting. So things that Connell was doing. So I mean, there was a really nice synergy between the university and activism going on in the community. So
Yeah.
I think there
was
a lot happening.
There was a benefit to smallness,
Yeah.
which is a little bit weird.
Yeah.
But it was true. Like if you think about it, the major sites of AIDS care were all on the same bus line, right? And we're a couple miles apart, and we were able to do things here that bigger cities couldn't do. So like we could, the doctor would order meals for people to be delivered, then the UAF would deliver those meals, but then the volunteer from the UAF would notice that the person wasn't eating them, and so they would then go back to Dr. Reese. Right, and so the UAF was always communicating with Reese and vice versa. And in places like Seattle, they were stunned that we did that. Like in Seattle, it was just too big, and there were too many people responding, which is great. Not too many, but you know what I mean. And so the smallness created more effective communication, which allowed us to do more with less. Which is not me advocating that any of this should have been done with less, right? But we were pretty effective. Is that?
There was also the Rail Court of the Golden Spike Empire,
totally.
The drag organization.
Mhm.
They did all the fundraising. Well, not all of it, but
They did a lot.
so much fundraising because our beloved legislature was not helpful.
There was initially, they actually debated on the Hill interning people on Antelope Island. Right, so there was an actual discussion by the Utah legislature. They did not pass, right, but there was a discussion about passing legislation to take all people with AIDS and put them on Antelope Island. And that was not uncommon. In a lot of conservative places, you would hear people with they would pick a local landmark that would be easy, easy to quarantine people in, and they'd be like, we'll send them here. And so that part wasn't great.
Yeah. I would have answered your question, but I would have done it in 2 sentences. So I defer to the expert. No, I defer to the expert. No, I can't. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done it as good as you. So I wouldn't have done it justice.
Are there any other questions? Okay, one more round of applause.